The carriage wheels hammered against the dirt road, each violent jolt sending pain through her bruised body. Wind clawed at her dress, snapping the thin fabric against her legs as if trying to tear it away. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back, the rope biting into her wrists until they burned and throbbed. Every breath tasted of dust and fear. The countryside rushed past in a blur of green hills and open sky, beautiful and cruel all at once, because she knew she might never see it again as a free woman. She had been taken at dawn. The memory replayed in her mind like a wound that refused to close. The quiet morning, the soft light filtering through the tall windows of the manor, the sudden crash of glass, heavy boots on polished floors, rough hands dragging her from her bed while she screamed for help that never came in time. They had moved fast, too fast, gagging her, binding her, hauling her into the carriage before the household could even wake fully. By the time the alarm bells rang, the kidnappers were already racing away. Now, hours later, the road stretched endlessly ahead, and hope felt like a fragile thing, easy to crush. One of the men glanced back at her, his mouth twisting into a cruel smile. "Stop staring," he barked. "You'll get where you're going soon enough." She lowered her eyes, hiding the fire burning behind them. They thought her broken. They thought fear had won. They were wrong. The carriage swerved sharply as the driver urged the horses faster. Ahead, the road narrowed, winding between rolling hills before dropping steeply toward a river valley. It was dangerous terrain, especially at this speed. The kidnappers didn't care. They were desperate to put distance between themselves and pursuit. Behind them, far down the road, a shape appeared against the horizon. At first, it was only a dark speck, barely visible through the dust cloud kicked up by the carriage. Then it grew larger, faster, closer. The rhythm of hooves echoed faintly, then louder, then unmistakable. A horse. No, two. Her heart leapt painfully in her chest. One of the kidnappers twisted in his seat, squinting into the distance. His expression changed. "Someone's coming," he muttered. The driver cursed and cracked the reins harder. The horses surged forward, muscles straining, foam flecking their mouths. The carriage rattled violently, wood groaning under the strain. Inside, she was thrown against the side, pain flaring through her shoulder, but she didn't cry out. Her eyes were fixed on the riders behind them. As they drew closer, she saw him. The Duke. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking him. He rode like the land itself belonged to him. Posture straight, dark coat streaming behind him, eyes locked on the fleeing carriage. His horse thundered over the ground with relentless power, every stride eating up the distance between them. Beside him rode another man, but it was the Duke who commanded the moment, who seemed carved from fury and resolve. Relief crashed in her so suddenly it almost made her dizzy. He had come. She leaned forward as far as her bonds allowed, heart pounding wildly. She wanted to scream his name, to let him know she was alive, that she was still fighting. But her voice failed her, trapped in her chest by fear and the rushing wind. The kidnappers panicked. "Faster," one shouted. "They're gaining." The driver lashed the horses again, pushing them beyond reason. The carriage hurtled down the road, wheels skidding dangerously close to the edge where the ground dropped away. Stones flew. The wooden frame creaked and protested. One wrong move, and they would all plunge into the ravine below. Behind them, the Duke urged his horse onward, teeth clenched, eyes blazing. He could see the carriage clearly now. He could see her. She met his gaze for a single, breathless moment. Everything else faded. The fear, the pain, the roar of the wind. There was only that look, full of urgency and command, telling her, without words, that he would not stop, that he would reach her no matter the cost. The road curved sharply ahead, narrowing even more. The kidnappers veered toward the edge, hoping the dangerous path would slow their pursuers. Instead, it gave the Duke his chance. He pushed his horse harder, closing the gap until he was almost alongside the carriage. His companion fell slightly behind, covering him. The Duke leaned low over his horse's neck, matching speed with the racing wheels. She watched him, breath caught in her throat. He was close enough now that she could see the strain in his face, the sweat darkening his hair, the fury burning in his eyes. He reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the carriage, but the vehicle lurched suddenly, pulling just out of his grasp. The driver laughed harshly. "You're too late," he shouted. The Duke ignored him. He rose slightly in his saddle, balancing with impossible control, and reached again. At that moment, one of the kidnappers made a fatal mistake. He stood, pulling a pistol from his coat, aiming wildly at the Duke. The shot rang out, echoing across the hills. The bullet missed, but the sudden movement threw off the balance of the carriage. One wheel struck a stone, cracking loudly. The carriage lurched toward the edge of the road. She screamed as the world tilted. The driver fought the reins, shouting in panic. The horses reared, hooves slipping on loose gravel. For a terrifying second, it seemed they would all tumble into the ravine. The Duke acted without hesitation. He surged forward, bringing his horse even closer, so close that the space between them vanished. He grabbed the side of the carriage with one hand, steadying himself, and reached inside with the other. Their fingers brushed. Electric shock raced through her. She lunged forward as far as her bonds allowed, desperate to reach him. The carriage bucked violently, and his grip slipped. He swore under his breath, muscles straining as he tried again. "Jump," he shouted. His voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. "Jump." Fear froze her. The ground below rushed past at terrifying speed. One mistake, one misjudged movement, and she would be crushed beneath the wheels or trampled by hooves. But behind the fear was trust. Absolute, unshakable trust. She looked into his eyes. He nodded once. She didn't think. She moved, throwing her weight toward him. She leaped from the carriage, heart screaming in her chest. For a fraction of a second, she was suspended in the air, nothing beneath her but rushing ground and fate. Then his arms closed around her. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs as he hauled her against his chest, twisting in the saddle to protect her. His horse staggered but kept its footing, powerful muscles absorbing the shock. The world spun, then steadied. She was alive. The carriage thundered past them, out of control now. One wheel shattered completely, and the vehicle veered wildly, crashing into the roadside embankment. The kidnappers were thrown free, their shouts lost in the chaos as the horses bolted without them. The Duke reined his horse to a stop, holding her tightly, one arm locked around her waist, the other controlling the reins. His chest rose and fell rapidly beneath her cheek. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She trembled violently, the aftermath of fear and adrenaline crashing over her. He tightened his grip, anchoring her, grounding her in the solid reality of his presence. "You're safe," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you." Tears burned her eyes. She nodded against him, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the truth of those words. Behind them, the road lay scarred and silent, the danger past for now. But as she clung to him, she knew this was only the beginning. The people who had taken her would not give up easily, and the world they were returning to was far more dangerous than the open road. Still, for this moment, in his arms, she allowed herself to believe in survival. Because he had come for her, and he always would. The Duke did not slow until the road curved away from the ravine and the sound of chaos behind them faded into nothing but wind. Only then did he pull his horse to a halt, guiding it off the path and into a small hollow where the land dipped and trees offered cover. The horse snorted and stamped, sides heaving, foam clinging to its bit. The Duke slid from the saddle in one smooth motion, keeping his arms locked around her as his boots struck the ground. Her legs nearly gave way the moment her feet touched the earth. He caught her before she could fall, lowering her gently until she could stand, though she still leaned heavily against him. Her entire body trembled, not from cold, but from the shock that was finally catching up with her. The silence felt unreal after the thunder of hooves and wheels, like the world had suddenly stopped breathing. "You're hurt," he said, his eyes scanning her face, her shoulders, the torn fabric of her dress. "I don't think so," she managed, though her voice shook. "Just shaken." His jaw tightened at the sight of the ropes biting into her wrists. Without a word, He reached for the knife at his belt and sliced through them with swift, precise movements. The ropes fell away, leaving angry red marks behind. He took her hands carefully, as if afraid she might shatter, and rubbed warmth back into her fingers. She watched him, the reality of his presence still sinking in. The Duke, here now, alive and solid before her. Not a memory, not a desperate hope. Him. How did you find me? She asked. His eyes darkened. They made mistakes, and I followed them. That was all he said, but she knew what it meant. No sleep, no rest, riding hard, pushing himself and his men without mercy. He had chased her across miles of countryside without hesitation. A sound broke the moment. Hoofbeats. The Duke's hand went instantly to his sword, his body shifting subtly in front of her. But the tension eased when his companion emerged from the trees, reins in hand, face drawn but relieved. They crashed, the man reported. The carriage is ruined. 2 of them are alive, badly shaken. Good, the Duke replied coldly. Tie them. We'll deal with them later. The man nodded and glanced at her. I'm glad you're safe, my lady. She managed a faint smile in response, though her attention remained fixed on the Duke. Only when his companion disappeared again did the tightness in his posture ease slightly. He turned back to her, concern replacing fury. We can't stay here, he said. They weren't alone. If others are waiting ahead. She nodded quickly. I understand. He helped her mount his horse, settling her carefully in front of him. When he climbed up behind her, his arms wrapped around her instinctively, protective and steady. The warmth of him seeped through her chilled skin, and for the first time since the kidnapping, she felt truly anchored to the world. They rode at a more controlled pace now, keeping to narrow paths and sheltered ground. The countryside no longer blurred past. Instead, it unfolded slowly, fields, hedges, distant farms unaware of how close danger had come. As they rode, the adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her head drooped forward, and she startled herself awake more than once. You can rest, he murmured. I've got you. She leaned back slightly, trusting him completely. The steady rhythm of the horse and the sound of his breathing lulled her, but sleep would not fully come. Too many images haunted her mind. The kidnapper's laughter, the gunshot, the terrifying moment of the jump. After a long while, she spoke again. They said I was leverage. His arms tightened. Against whom? You, she whispered. He went still. They knew my name, she continued. They knew where I would be. They knew when the guards were thin. This wasn't random. No, he agreed quietly. It wasn't. They rode on in silence, the weight of that truth settling heavily between them. If she had been taken to reach him, then the danger was far from over. Whoever had ordered her kidnapping had resources, information, and patience. As dusk approached, the Duke guided the horse toward a secluded hunting lodge tucked deep within his lands. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, a sign that it was occupied and safe. He dismounted first, then lifted her down again, his hands lingering as if reluctant to let go. Inside, the lodge was warm and dimly lit. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across stone walls. A servant rushed forward in shock at the sight of them, then immediately into action at the Duke's sharp instructions. Water was brought. Food. Blankets. She sank into a chair by the fire, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. The Duke crouched in front of her, his expression softening as he examined her wrists and the bruises beginning to bloom along her arms. I should never have let you leave unguarded, he said. She shook her head weakly. You couldn't have known. But I should have anticipated, he replied, his voice edged with self-blame. My enemies don't strike at me directly anymore. They strike at what I care about. Her heart skipped painfully at his words. Before she could respond, his companion returned, blood staining one sleeve. They're secured, he said. One of them is talking. He says they were paid well. Too well. By whom? The Duke asked. The man hesitated. He claims he doesn't know, only that the orders came through an intermediary. But there was a name mentioned more than once. The Duke's gaze sharpened. Whose? The Crown, the man said quietly. The room seemed to darken. The Duke stood slowly, every muscle rigid. That's impossible, he said. or treason, or both, the man replied. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. If the crown itself, or someone close enough to use its name, was involved, then this was far larger than a simple kidnapping. It was a warning, a test, perhaps the opening move in something far more dangerous. The Duke dismissed his companion and turned back to her. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with controlled fire. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, "under guard. No one leaves or enters without my word." "And you?" she asked. "I'm going to hear everything those men have to say," he replied. "And then I'm going to make sure this never happens again." She reached out, catching his hand before he could turn away. He looked down at her, surprise flickering briefly across his features. "Be careful," she said softly. For a moment, the mask slipped. He squeezed her hand tightly. "I almost lost you today," he said. "I won't make that mistake twice." When he left, the room felt emptier despite the fire's warmth. She wrapped the blanket around herself, staring into the flames as thoughts churned in her mind. Whoever was behind this knew too much. They were powerful, and they would not accept failure easily. Later that night, long after the lodge had fallen quiet, the Duke returned. His face was shadowed, his movements tense. He sat across from her, without speaking for a long moment. "They won't talk anymore," he said at last. "But I learned enough." Her pulse quickened. "Enough to stop them. Enough to know this was only the beginning," he replied. "They want to see how far I would go. Why I would risk." She met his gaze steadily. "And now they know." "Yes," he said grimly. "I would risk everything." The fire crackled between them, its light reflecting in his eyes. Outside, the night stretched vast and silent, hiding threats yet unseen. She understood now that being rescued did not mean being safe. It meant being drawn deeper into a game where power, loyalty, and betrayal would collide. And at the center of it all stood the Duke. And her. Morning came slowly, filtered through mist and pale light creeping between the tall trees surrounding the hunting lodge. The world looked calm, almost gentle, as if the violence of the previous day had been nothing more than a nightmare. But she knew better. Fear still lingered in her bones, and danger pressed close, unseen but unmistakably real. She woke to the sound of voices. "Lo, urgent, mail." She lay still beneath the heavy blanket, listening. The Duke's voice carried through the stone walls, controlled but sharp, followed by the murmured replies of his men. Maps were being unfolded. Orders were being given. Whatever he had learned the night before had set events into motion. When she finally rose and dressed, her hands shook only slightly as she fastened the simple gown provided by the servants. The bruises on her wrists had darkened overnight, angry reminders of how close she had come to losing everything. She took a deep breath and stepped out into the main room. The Duke turned the moment he saw her. "You should still be resting," he said. "I've rested enough," she replied calmly. "If this concerns me, and it does, I won't hide in another room." For a brief second, he looked as if he might argue. Then he nodded. "Very well." A large map covered the table, weighted down at the corners by daggers and candle holders. Several men stood around it, faces grim. Roads were marked in charcoal, names circled, symbols she didn't recognize but instinctively distrusted. They were supposed to deliver her here, one man said, pointing to a marked location. An abandoned estate near the eastern border. "Who owns it?" the Duke asked. "No one officially," the man replied. "But it's been used before. Quiet meetings. Exchanges." "By whom?" she asked. The men exchanged glances. "People who don't want to be seen," one answered carefully. The Duke's jaw tightened, which means someone powerful enough to stay hidden. She felt the weight of his words settle heavily in her chest. "They use the crown's name," she said, "or at least claim to." "That is what troubles me most," the Duke replied. "If this were merely bandits or a rival house, the message would be clear. But invoking the crown changes everything." One of the men shifted uneasily. "If word spreads that the crown may be involved." "It won't," the Duke said sharply. "Not yet." Silence fell. He straightened and addressed them all. "I want eyes on every road leading east. Discreetly. No banners. No uniforms. Anyone watching us must see nothing but merchants and travelers." The men nodded and began to disperse. When they were alone again, she studied the Duke's face. He looked tired in a way she had never seen before. Not physically, but deeply, as if the weight of leadership pressed harder than ever. "You're thinking of leaving?" she said. "I am," he replied without hesitation. "And you're not taking me," she added. His gaze met hers. "No." She folded her arms. "You don't get to decide that alone. This is not a discussion," he said quietly but firmly. "You were already used as bait once. I will not allow it again. And what if I'm already part of this whether you like it or not?" she countered. "They took me to reach you. That means I know something or represent something they want. You represent leverage," he said bluntly, "which makes you a target." She stepped closer. "Then hiding me away won't change that. It will only make me blind." He hesitated. She could see the conflict behind his eyes, duty battling instinct, strategy clashing with fear. Finally, he spoke. "If you come with me, you will follow my orders without question." "I already do," she said softly. "Just not blindly." A long silence stretched between them. "At the very least," he said at last, "you will remain under guard at all times." She nodded. Agreed. Preparations moved quickly after that. Horses were saddled, supplies packed, messengers sent out in directions meant to confuse any unseen watchers. By midday, they were ready to leave the lodge behind. As they rode east, the land slowly changed. The rolling hills gave way to denser forests, the roads narrower and less traveled. Villages became scarce. The air felt heavier, as if secrets clung to the trees themselves. They stopped once to water the horses near stream. While the men tended to their duties, the Duke walked with her along the bank, just out of earshot. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. She looked at him. "You're not the type to hide things without reason." He exhaled slowly. "The estate they mentioned, it was once tied to my family." Her breath caught. "Ow! My father used it years ago," he said, "before he died, for meetings that could not take place at court." "What kind of meetings?" "The kind that shape kingdoms," he replied grimly. Understanding dawned painfully. "So this isn't just about you. It's about your name." "And my blood," he said. "If someone is digging into old alliances, old debts, they may be trying to force my hand." She studied his face, seeing not just a powerful duke, but a man cornered by history. "Then they chose the wrong way," she said quietly, "because now you'll fight back." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, I will." They reached the edge of the forest by nightfall, where the ruins of the old estate loomed in the distance. Broken towers cut jagged shapes against the darkening sky. Windows stared like empty eyes. Silence wrapped the place thickly, unnaturally. The Duke raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. "We don't approach openly," he said. "Not yet." They dismounted and made camp a short distance away, hidden among trees and rocks. Fires were kept low. Voices hushed. Every man was tense, alert. As darkness fully settled, she sat beside the Duke, sharing a small meal neither of them truly tasted. "Do you think they'll be here?" she asked. "If not tonight," he replied, "then soon. And if they are, then we learn who is bold enough to challenge me so directly." A sudden sound broke the stillness, a faint crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. The Duke's hand went instantly to his sword. Another sound followed, then another. They were not alone. Figures emerged from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, too many to count at first glance. Not bandits, too organized, too quiet. They moved with practiced ease, spreading out, surrounding the camp. "Stay behind me," the Duke murmured, rising to his feet. Steel whispered from scabbards. Horses snorted nervously. A man stepped forward from the darkness, hood pulled low over his face. "You came," the man said. "Just as expected." The Duke's voice was cold. "You took someone under my protection. That was a mistake." The man laughed softly. "On the contrary, it was a message." "A message from whom?" the Duke demanded. The hooded figure tilted his head slightly, gaze flicking briefly toward her before returning to the Duke. "From those who are tired of waiting," he said, "and tired of your silence." The Duke stepped forward, fury radiating from him. "If you want war, you've chosen the fastest way to get it." The man's smile widened beneath the hood. We already have. In an instant, the night exploded into motion. Arrows flew from the darkness. Steel clashed. Shouts shattered the silence as the Duke's men surged forward to meet the attack. She retreated instinctively, heart hammering, but she did not run. She watched the Duke fight, fierce, precise, unstoppable, cutting through enemies with controlled rage. This was not the polished noble of court. This was a man forged by battle and betrayal. The fight was brutal but brief. The attackers were skilled, but the Duke's men were better prepared. One by one, the shadows fell back, retreating into the forest. The hooded man was the last to go. Before disappearing, he called out, "This isn't over, Duke. You've only stepped onto the board." Silence returned, broken only by heavy breathing and the groans of the wounded. The Duke turned to her immediately. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No." He searched her face, then pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her as if grounding himself. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "But neither will I." As the night closed around them once more, she knew the truth with chilling clarity. The kidnapping had been only the opening move. Forces far greater than she had imagined were now in play, and the game had truly begun. Dawn broke over the ruins with a pale, uneasy light, revealing the scars left behind by the night's violence. Broken arrows lay scattered across the forest floor. Dark stains marked where men had fallen. The air smelled of damp earth and iron, and even the birds seemed hesitant to return to their morning songs. She stood at the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching as the Duke's men moved among the wounded. Two of their attackers had been captured alive, bound and kneeling beneath a tree. Both kept their heads down, bloodied but silent. The Duke approached them slowly. His coat was torn, his knuckles bruised, but his posture was unyielding. He looked every inch the man his enemies feared, calm on the surface, lethal beneath it. "Look at me," he said. One of the prisoners hesitated. The Duke struck him without warning, a sharp blow that snapped his head back. "I will not repeat myself." The man raised his eyes, fear naked in them. "Who sent you?" the Duke demanded. The prisoner swallowed. "We were hired." "By whom?" "We don't know his name," the man said quickly, "only that he speaks for others. Powerful ones. Powerful enough to use the crown shadow," the Duke said coldly. The man said nothing. The Duke crouched until they were eye level. "You took part in the kidnapping of a woman under my protection," he said quietly. "You ambushed my men. You threatened my lands. I will have answers." The second prisoner finally spoke, his voice shaking. "We were told she mattered to you, that taking her would force you to come here. And once I arrived," the Duke asked, They said you would be given a choice." Silence fell. "A choice between what?" she asked, stepping forward despite the warning look from one of the guards. The prisoner's eyes flicked to her, then away again. "Between obedience and ruin," the first man muttered. The Duke straightened slowly. "Obedience to whom?" "Those who are rebuilding what your father destroyed," the second man said. "Old alliances, old power. They want you to take your place or be removed." Her breath caught. The Duke's father. The name hovered between them like a ghost. "Removed how?" the Duke asked. The man swallowed hard. "Public disgrace, charges of treason, or accidents." The Duke's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "And you thought fear would make me kneel. It has worked before," the man whispered. The Duke rose to his full height. "Take them away," he said to his men. "They'll be delivered to the capital." Quietly, the prisoners were dragged off, pleading now, their bravado shattered. She watched the Duke's face as the clearing settled back into uneasy calm. His expression was unreadable, but she sensed the storm raging beneath. "Your father destroyed something," she said gently. "What was it?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured for her to walk with him. They moved among the ruins of the estate, stone walls cracked and overgrown with ivy. Once this place had been grand. Now it felt like a monument to secrets best left buried. "My father was part of a coalition," he said at last. Nobles who believed the crown was being manipulated by a small inner circle. Men who enriched themselves while the kingdom bled. And he opposed them. Yes, the Duke replied. He exposed them. Forced reforms cost powerful people their positions. And his life, she said quietly. He nodded. Officially, it was illness. Unofficially, no one ever truly believed that. She stopped walking. So this is revenge. And leverage, he said. They believe I'll finish what he started, or submit and undo it. She studied the crumbling stone around them. They're afraid of you. They should be, he replied flatly. By midday, the Duke made his decision. We're going to the capital, he announced to his men. Not quietly, not hiding. One of the captains frowned. That's exactly what they'll expect. Good, the Duke said. Let them see me coming. Her heart tightened. And me? You'll come with us, he said. But you'll be protected. I don't doubt that, she replied. I doubt their restraint. He met her gaze steadily. So do I, which is why we end this at its source. The journey to the capital took 2 days. They traveled openly now, banners unfurled, the Duke's colors visible from miles away. Villages watched them pass with wary curiosity. Word spread quickly. Whispers followed in their wake. By the time the city's towers appeared on the horizon, tension hung thick in the air. The capital loomed vast and imposing, its walls ancient, its gates crowded with soldiers. As they approached, the guards stiffened, recognition flashing across their faces. The Duke did not slow. The gates opened. Inside, the city buzzed with life. Merchants shouting, carriages rolling, citizens unaware of the quiet war threading its way toward the heart of power. But beneath the noise, she sensed it. Eyes watching from windows, messages being carried, alliances shifting. At the Duke's estate within the city, they were met with uneasy courtesy. Servants bowed too deeply. Officials smiled too quickly. They know, she murmured as they climbed the steps. Yes, he said, and they're deciding how to respond. The response came that evening. A royal summons. The Duke read the sealed parchment without expression, then handed it to her. They moved faster than I expected. She scanned it. Formal, polite, dangerous. The king wants to see you, she said. He wants to see us, the Duke corrected. The palace glittered under torchlight, its beauty sharp enough to cut. Guards escorted them through echoing halls lined with tapestries depicting victories and betrayals alike. In the throne room, the king waited. He was older than she had imagined, his crown heavy, his eyes sharp with intelligence and exhaustion. Around him stood advisors, some familiar, some not. She felt the weight of their scrutiny immediately. Duke, the king said, rising slightly, you arrive with drama, as always. Your Majesty, the Duke replied, bowing just enough to satisfy protocol. I come with truths that can no longer wait. The king's gaze shifted to her. And you bring company. She was kidnapped in an attempt to control me, the Duke said bluntly. The men responsible claimed to act in your name. Murmurs rippled through the room. The king's expression hardened. That is a grave accusation. It is a grave crime, the Duke countered. One that demands investigation. The king studied him for a long moment. And you believe I ordered this? I believe someone close to you wants me to think so. The Duke replied evenly. Silence fell. The king exhaled slowly. There are forces within my court that even I struggle to control, he admitted at last. Men who cling to old power and resent reform. So you know, the Duke said. I know enough to be concerned, the king replied, but not enough to name them. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. They believe fear will make him kneel, she said. It won't. Several advisors stiffened. The king's eyes sharpened as he looked at her. You speak boldly. I speak from experience, she replied, her voice steady. They took me. They threatened me. And they failed. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passed through the king's gaze. Very well, he said. Then we will flush them out. How, the Duke asked. We announce an inquiry, the king said. Public, broad, one that forces them to react. They'll strike first, the Duke warned. Yes, the king agreed. And when they do, they'll expose themselves. The Duke considered this, then nodded once. I will play my part. And she, the king asked. The Duke did not hesitate. She stays under my protection. The king inclined his head. See that you do. As they left the throne room, The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on them both. "They're setting a trap," she said. "Yes," the Duke replied. "For our enemies." "And for us," she added. He glanced at her, a grim smile touching his lips. "We'll be ready." That night, from the balcony of the Duke's estate, she looked out over the city lights. Somewhere among them, people were plotting, waiting, sharpening knives in the dark. She was no longer a bystander. She was part of the storm now, and soon the capital would feel it. The capital woke the next morning buzzing with rumors. By dawn, the announcement had spread through every market and corridor of power. A royal inquiry was being opened into treason, corruption, and abuses of authority within the court itself. No names were spoken, but everyone knew what it meant. Someone high enough to shake the kingdom had made a fatal miscalculation. From the balcony of the Duke's estate, she watched the city stir, feeling the tension ripple through the streets like an approaching storm. Messengers hurried past below. Guards doubled their patrols. Doors that had always stood open now closed a little faster. "They're afraid," she said. "Yes," the Duke replied from behind her. "Fear makes people careless." Inside, his estate had transformed into a fortress. Trusted men guarded every entrance. Corridors were cleared of unnecessary staff. Windows that overlooked neighboring rooftops were shuttered. Even so, the Duke moved with a constant awareness, his hand never far from his weapon. By midday, the first move was made. A messenger arrived breathless, bearing news from the palace. One of the king's senior advisors had fled the city during the night, abandoning his estate and household. The Duke's expression hardened. "That was faster than I expected." "Flight is a confession," she said quietly. "Sometimes," he agreed, "or a distraction." They learned the truth hours later. The advisor's estate burned. Smoke rose in a dark column visible even from the Duke's grounds. The fire had started in the record's wing, destroying years of documents before spreading to the rest of the house. No bodies were found. "He erased evidence," she said. "And himself," the Duke replied, "but not completely." That evening, another message arrived, this one more personal. An invitation. It was delivered by hand, sealed with a signet she recognized from court. The wording was polite, almost warm, requesting her presence at a private gathering hosted by one of the kingdom's most respected noblewomen. Attendance was framed as an honor. Declining would be noticed. The Duke read it once, then crushed it in his fist. "Absolutely not. They're inviting me," she said calmly. "Not you." "Which makes it worse," he snapped. "This is bait." "Everything is bait right now," she replied. "Including you." His jaw tightened. "You're not going." "If I refuse," she said, "they'll know I'm under your complete control. That tells them fear works." He turned away, pacing. "And if you go, they'll try to isolate you." "Yes," she agreed. "Which tells us who they are." He stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. "You want to use yourself as a signal." "I already am one," she said softly. "They chose me. We can either let them move unseen or force them into the light." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken fear. Finally, he spoke. "You will not go alone." "I wouldn't expect to." Preparations were meticulous. She wore a gown elegant enough to meet court expectations, but simple enough to move in. Hidden beneath the fabric were subtle reinforcements, thin leather, light but protective. A small blade rested against her thigh, a gift from the Duke given without comment. "You won't need it," he said, "but if you do, don't hesitate." His men would be everywhere, disguised as servants, guards, guests, watching every doorway, every shadow. The Duke himself would not attend, his absence too conspicuous, but his presence would be felt. The gathering took place in a sprawling manor near the heart of the city, its gardens famous for their beauty and secrecy. Lanterns glowed softly among sculpted hedges. Music drifted through the air, carefully chosen to soothe and distract. She felt eyes on her the moment she arrived. Smiles greeted her. Polite conversation followed. Compliments offered with just a hint of curiosity beneath them. She returned each with practiced grace, her senses alert, cataloging every face, every reaction. The hostess found her quickly. "My dear," the noblewoman said warmly, taking her hands. How kind of you to come after everything you've endured. Her grip was firm, evaluating. Thank you for the invitation, she replied. I'm honored. They spoke of harmless things at first, weather, art, the city's recent growth. All the while, she felt the conversation circling something sharper. Change can be unsettling, the noble woman said eventually. Not everyone welcomes it. True, she replied, but stagnation can be deadly. A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face before it was masked by a smile. You sound like the Duke. I've learned from him, she said evenly. They moved through the gardens, joined by others, men and women of rank, all watching, listening. Gradually the talk shifted. Subtle criticisms of the inquiry, concerns for stability, questions about loyalty. Then came the test. One of the men leaned closer, voice low. If the Duke were to compromise, perhaps this unrest could end peacefully. She met his gaze steadily. Compromise with criminals rarely ends peacefully. A murmur rippled through the group. You speak boldly, another said. For someone without a title. She smiled. Titles didn't stop them from kidnapping me. Silence fell. The noblewoman laughed lightly. Forgive us, she said. We forget how close to danger you've been. Danger has a way of clarifying things, she replied. That was when she noticed a shift. The musicians faltered. Servants began guiding guests away from certain paths. Doors closed softly but firmly. The garden seemed suddenly smaller, more enclosed. The noblewoman's hand tightened on her arm. Come, she said. There's someone who wishes to speak with you privately. This was it. They led her through a side passage into a dimly lit sitting room. The door closed behind them with a decisive click. Inside waited a man she recognized instantly. A royal counselor. His reputation was immaculate, loyal, untouchable. Until now. I'm glad you accepted the invitation, he said smoothly. It tells me you're reasonable. It tells you I'm not afraid, she corrected. He smiled thinly. Fear is relative. The noblewoman withdrew, leaving them alone. You were taken because of the Duke, the counselor said. But that doesn't mean you must fall with him. Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm. Is this where you offer me protection? I offer you a choice, he replied. Distance yourself from him. Publicly, privately. Encourage him to step back. The inquiry ends. Everyone is safe. And if I refuse? He sighed. Then you remain a vulnerability. She leaned forward slightly. You're admitting involvement. I'm acknowledging reality, he said. The Duke threatens balance. Old agreements. Necessary ones. Necessary for whom? She asked. For those who keep the kingdom running, he replied. Who make the difficult decisions. You mean those who profit, she said coldly. His smile faded. Careful. No, she said firmly. You should be. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're more dangerous than I expected. She rose to her feet. Then you've underestimated me. Just like you underestimated him. The door burst open. Steel flashed. Shouts filled the room as the Duke's men flooded in, weapons drawn. The counselor stepped back, face pale with fury and shock. This meeting is over, a guard said coldly. As they escorted her out, the counselor's voice followed her. You've chosen a side. She turned once, meeting his gaze. No, she said. I exposed one. Outside, the night air hit her like freedom. She was guided swiftly back to the carriage, heart racing, not with fear, but with grim satisfaction. When she returned to the Duke's estate, he was waiting. The moment the doors closed, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Did they touch you? He demanded. No, she said, but they tried to bargain. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. And now we know who's behind it, she replied. At least one of them. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. Good. She met his gaze steadily. They think you're the threat. He brushed his thumb gently across her bruised wrist. They're right. Outside, the city hummed with unease. The trap had been sprung. Masks were slipping, and the kingdom was edging closer to a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The next move would not be subtle. It would be decisive. The night after the gathering passed without sleep. She sat by the window of the Duke's estate, watching torchlight move along the distant streets as patrols increased and whispers turned into orders. The city felt like a coiled animal, tense, alert, ready to strike or flee. Somewhere beyond those walls, men who had ruled from the shadows were realizing their names were no longer safe. Behind her, the Duke stood silently, studying reports brought in by his captains. Each parchment added another thread to a widening web. "They're closing ranks," one man said. "Counselors who rarely agree are suddenly aligned." "Too aligned. Fear will do that," the Duke replied. "Who's missing?" The captain hesitated. "Three names. All powerful. All absent from court today." The Duke nodded once. "They're preparing to move." When the men withdrew, the Duke crossed the room to her. His expression was hard, but his voice softened. "You did exactly what we needed tonight." "It doesn't feel like a victory," she said. "It isn't," he replied. "It's confirmation." She turned to face him. "They won't stop now." "No," he agreed. "Now, they'll escalate." As if summoned by his words, a horn sounded in the distance. Low, urgent. Another followed. Then another. The Duke moved instantly. To the council hall, he ordered his guards. Now! They rode through the city at speed, banners snapping in the wind. Citizens pressed themselves against walls as the Duke's colors passed, sensing history in motion. By the time they reached the palace, chaos already stirred within its gates. The council chamber was crowded, voices raised, tempers fraying. When the Duke entered, silence fell like a blade. The king stood at the head of the chamber, his face drawn. "You're late," he said. "I came as fast as treachery allows," the Duke replied coolly. A ripple of outrage spread, but before anyone could respond, a messenger burst in, pale and shaking. "My king," the man gasped, "the eastern garrison has sealed its gates. They refuse royal command." Shock rippled through the room. "Who commands it?" the king demanded. The messenger swallowed. "Lord Halvrin." The Duke's eyes narrowed. "One of your untouchables." The king's jaw tightened. "Summon him. Now." Another voice cut in, sharp and scornful. "He won't come." All heads turned. The counselor from the gathering stepped forward, his expression no longer polite. Because this inquiry was never about justice. It was about power, and power answers to strength. Guards shifted uneasily. The Duke stepped closer. "Careful," he warned. "You're standing on thin ground." The counselor smiled. "On the contrary, I stand with half the realm behind me." The chamber erupted. Accusations flew. Shouts echoed. Sides formed in seconds. The king raised his voice, but it was drowned out by the fracture spreading through his court. Then steel rang out. A blade flashed as one of the counselors lunged, not at the Duke, but at the king. Everything happened at once. The Duke moved faster than thought, slamming into the attacker, knocking him aside as guards surged forward. The king stumbled back, shock etched across his face. Blood splattered the marble floor. "Seize them," the Duke roared. Chaos consumed the chamber. Some guards obeyed. Others hesitated. A few turned their weapons on fellow soldiers. Civil war, she realized. Not tomorrow. Now. She backed away instinctively, heart hammering, until a hand gripped her arm. "The counselor. You should have taken the offer," he hissed, pulling her toward a side door. "Now you'll watch him burn." She reacted without thinking. The small blade the Duke had given her slid into her hand. She drove it into the counselor's shoulder with all her strength. He screamed, releasing her as guards tackled him to the ground. She staggered back, shaking, blades slipping from her fingers. The Duke was there instantly, gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered. "But this is worse than we thought." "Yes," he said grimly. "And now it's open." By nightfall, the capital was locked down. Gates sealed. Bells tolled warnings across districts. Word spread like fire. Factions within the court had attempted a coup. The king was alive, but shaken. Trust was shattered. In the Duke's estate, maps covered every surface. "They control the eastern garrison," a captain said, "and at least 2 southern trade routes." "Which means money," the Duke replied, "and men. They'll try to force the king to abdicate," another added, "or rule through him." The Duke's gaze flicked to her. "They miscalculated." "How?" she asked. "They underestimated how far I would go," he said, "and how visible this would become." He straightened. "We don't hide. We strike first, but lawfully. The king arrived under heavy guard before dawn. He looked smaller without ceremony, crown set aside, just a tired man facing the consequences of delayed action. I should have acted sooner, the king said quietly. Yes, the duke replied. You should have. Silence hung heavy. Then the king nodded. What do you propose? The duke laid out his plan. Public arrests. Immediate. High profile. Evidence gathered from seized estates and captured men. Loyal garrisons reinforced. The inquiry transformed into a tribunal under royal authority, with the duke at its head. You asked me to put my throne in your hands, the king said. I ask you to save it, the duke replied. The king's gaze shifted to her. And you trust him? She met his eyes steadily. With my life, and with yours. The king exhaled slowly. Then do it. The arrest began at sunrise. The city woke to shock as carriages rolled out under guard, bearing once untouchable nobles in chains. Estates were seized. Vaults opened. Documents dragged into the light. Names spilled from frightened mouths. Resistance flared in pockets. Brief, brutal, crushed. By the third day, the eastern garrison stood isolated, its commander surrounded and outnumbered. He surrendered before blood could spill across the fields. The counselor who had confronted her was brought before the tribunal, his arrogance stripped away. You think this ends with us? He spat. There will always be others. The duke leaned forward, voice cold and clear. Perhaps, but not like this. Not hidden. He turned to the king. Sentence. Exile. Confiscation. Public disgrace. It was not execution, but it was death of a different kind. When it was over, the city exhaled. The inquiry concluded not with whispers, but with proclamations. Reforms followed swiftly. Power shifted. The crown, bruised but intact, stood openly aligned with the duke. One evening, as calm finally settled, she joined the duke on the balcony overlooking the city. You could have taken more, she said. Power. Control. I never wanted rule, he replied. I wanted stability. And now, she asked. He looked at her, really looked at her. Now I want peace. She leaned against the stone railing. Do you think we'll have it? For a time, he said honestly. Long enough to matter. Below them, the city glowed, scarred, alive, resilient. You changed things, he said quietly. They will remember this. So will we, she replied. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. Not possessive, not protective, equal. The storm had passed for now, but both of them knew the truth. When you challenge shadows, they never disappear completely. They only retreat, and they wait. Autumn settled over the capital like a cautious promise. Leaves burned gold and crimson along the avenues, and the air carried the sharp scent of change. On the surface, life resumed its familiar rhythms. Markets reopened, festivals were announced, laughter returned to taverns. But beneath it all ran a quieter current, watchful and alert. The city had survived a fracture. It would not forget. She felt it everywhere. In the way conversations stopped when the duke entered a room. In the careful courtesy of nobles who once sneered. In the measured smiles of men who now understood that shadows had limits. The tribunal had ended weeks ago, but its echoes remained. That morning, she stood in the duke's study, sunlight slanting across stacks of newly drafted reforms. He sat at the desk, reading, annotating, sealing. Power, she had learned, was not only steel and soldiers. It was ink and patience. You're leaving again, she said, not accusing, observing. He glanced up. North this time. The border lords want reassurance. Or leverage, she replied. He allowed a faint smile. Or both. She crossed the room and rested a hand on the back of his chair. You don't have to go yourself every time. Yes, he said calmly. I do. She understood. Visibility had become his shield. Absence invited rumor. Rumor invited knives. A knock interrupted them. A guard entered, crisp and formal. My lord. A petition. The duke frowned. From whom? The guard hesitated. From the convent of St. Elin. She stiffened. The duke noticed at once. What is it? She took the parchment before he could. The seal was plain. The script precise. They're requesting asylum, she said quietly. For a woman. Name, he asked. She read it once more. Her breath caught. Marivid. The room seemed to narrow. Your sister? The Duke asked carefully. She nodded. I thought she was abroad. Hidden. So did I, he said. Why now? They say she's being pursued, she replied, by men asking questions about me. Silence stretched tight as wire. The Duke rose. Bring her here, he ordered the guard. Quietly, the guard bowed and left. She pressed her palm to the desk to steady herself. I didn't tell you everything, she said. I know, he replied gently. Tell me now. She met his gaze. Before I ever met you, before court, before titles mattered, I learned how to survive. My family learned it. We learned how to disappear. And your sister? She was better at it than I was, she said. Smarter, braver. She saw the danger coming before I did. He studied her. You think they're using her to reach you? Yes, she said without hesitation. And to reach you, through me. That evening, the convent carriage arrived under escort. The woman who stepped down looked thinner than she remembered, her eyes sharper, older. But the moment their gazes met, recognition burned through years of distance. Maribel, she whispered. Her sister embraced her fiercely. I knew you'd be alive, Maribel said. You always are. They moved inside quickly. Wine was poured. Food brought. Guards posted discreetly. When Maribel finally sat, she spoke without preamble. They're reorganizing. The Duke leaned forward. Who? The remnants, Maribel said. Those who didn't fall with the council. Financiers. Brokers. Men without banners. They want revenge, the Duke said. They want control, Maribel corrected. Revenge is emotional. This is structural. She glanced at her sister. They followed her because she became a symbol. The Duke exhaled slowly. Then we don't hide. Maribel shook her head. You can't expose what doesn't stand still. They move through trade routes. Guilds. Debt. Names, the Duke said. We need names. I have some, Maribel replied. Not enough, but enough to start. Over the next days, the estate became a quiet hive. Maps were updated. Ledgers cross-checked. Old favors called in. The Duke moved carefully now, less visible, more precise. The crown supported him publicly, but kept its distance, allowing deniability. She worked beside him, long hours, eyes aching, mind sharp. For the first time, she felt not protected, but partnered. Late one night, as rain tapped against the windows, Maribel paused over a ledger. There's a pattern, she said. Shipping insurance. Claims that never resolve. Profits redirected. The Duke leaned over her shoulder. A shadow bank. Yes, Maribel said. They fund unrest, then profit from the repair. And they'll star the city if pressed, he said. Unless exposed, she replied. Exposure, they learned, was dangerous. 2 days later, a warehouse burned near the docks. No casualties, no witnesses. A message. That night, a note appeared in the Duke's private chambers. No seal, no signature. Step back, or watch the city bleed. She read it twice, then handed it to him. They're threatening civilians. They always do, he said. And you won't step back. No, he agreed. She searched his face. Then we need leverage. He met her gaze. We need proof that hurts. Maribel closed the ledger. Then we need to go where they won't expect us. Where? The Duke asked. Maribel smiled grimly. The exchange. The exchange was sacred. Neutral ground, where merchants, guild masters, and insurers gathered under ancient protections. Violence there would collapse, trust across the realm. Impossible, the Duke said. They'd never risk it. That's why they're there, Maribel replied. They planned for 3 nights. Disguises, false manifests, timed deliveries. The Duke would not enter openly. He would observe. She and Maribel would move among the clerks, collecting, copying, memorizing. On the 4th morning, they went. The exchange buzzed with restrained urgency. Ink scratched. Coins chimed. Deals were sealed with nods rather than words. She felt eyes brush past her and move on. She breathed steadily. Maribel slipped a thin packet into her sleeve. Found it, she murmured. The Duke's signal came moments later. Time to leave. They were almost clear when a voice called out, "Mistress!" She froze. A man stepped into their path, smiling without warmth. "You dropped this." He held a seal. Old. Familiar. The Duke appeared instantly, hand resting casually near his weapon. "Is there a problem?" The man's eyes flicked to him, calculating. "Only curiosity." Maribel stepped forward. "Curiosity can be expensive here." The man laughed softly. "So can loyalty." He stepped aside. They left without running. That night, the proof lay spread across the Duke's desk. Names, accounts, transfers. The spine of the shadow bank laid bare. "Release it," Maribel said. All at once. The Duke shook his head. "Targeted. Precise. We collapse the structure, not the market." She touched his hand. "If you move carefully, they'll move faster." He met her gaze. "And if I move loudly, innocents suffer." Silence. Then Maribel spoke. "There's another way." They looked to her. "We let them think they've won," she said. "We leak a partial retreat. A concession. A lie," the Duke said. "A trap," she corrected. By dawn, whispers spread that the Duke would step back from trade oversight, that the Crown sought calm. By dusk, the shadow bank moved to consolidate. By midnight, the Duke struck. Warrants executed across districts. Accounts frozen. Ships seized at harbor. Guild charters suspended pending inquiry. The city held its breath. Resistance flared briefly, then collapsed under the weight of evidence. By morning, the exchange reopened under new oversight. Trust shaken, but intact. Exhausted, she stood on the balcony as bells rang. Not alarms this time, but ours. Maribel joined her. "You won." "For now," she replied. Maribel smiled. "That's all anyone ever gets." Behind them, the Duke stepped into the light. He took her hand, steady and warm. "The shadows learned something," he said quietly. "So did we." Below, the city lived. And for the first time since the road, since the jump, since the knives in the dark, she believed that survival could look like this. Earned, shared, and bright enough to hold the night at bay. Winter arrived without ceremony. Snow dusted the capital's rooftops, softening edges and muting sound. But it did nothing to quiet the undercurrent of tension that still ran beneath the city's heart. Bells rang on schedule. Markets opened on time. On the surface, order had been restored. Yet everyone knew the truth. The shadows had been wounded, not destroyed. She stood at the tall window of the Duke's estate, watching flakes drift down like ash. Winter had always felt honest to her. It did not pretend to be gentle. It did not hide its danger. Behind her, the Duke finished reading the latest reports. "The northern routes are stable," he said. For now, she echoed. Maribel had left 2 days earlier, slipping back into the world beyond the capital under a new name and stronger protection. She worked best unseen, and all three of them knew she was safer that way. Still, her absence left a quiet weight in the room she had filled with sharp insight and restless energy. "They'll try something else," she said. "Yes," the Duke replied, "but not openly. Not again so soon." She turned to face him. "You sound almost disappointed." A corner of his mouth lifted. "I don't enjoy chaos. I just refuse to be ruled by it." A knock interrupted them. Not urgent. Controlled. The captain of the Duke's guard entered, helmet tucked under his arm. "My lord, a delegation from the exchange requests an audience." The Duke's expression hardened. "Already. They say it concerns a breach," the captain said. "Not financial." "Then what?" she asked. The captain hesitated. "Information." The Duke nodded once. "Bring them." The delegation consisted of 3 people, 2 men and a woman, dressed plainly but expensively. They carried themselves with the careful confidence of those who believe neutrality was their armor. "We come in good faith," the woman began. "And concern." "Stated," the Duke said. She drew a breath. "Since the collapse of the shadow accounts, we've noticed unusual activity. Messages moving through channels that were previously dormant." "Between whom?" he asked. "Foreign interests," one of the men replied. "Private fleets. Mercenary brokers." The room felt colder. "Names," the Duke said. The woman shook her head. "They're masking them, but the payments are real, and they're aimed inward." She felt a slow chill crawl up her spine. You think this is no longer internal? Yes, the woman said quietly. We believe someone is inviting outside force into the kingdom. Silence followed. That's treason, she said. It's desperation, the Duke corrected. And it's far more dangerous. When the delegation left, the Duke turned to her immediately. We need to warn the king. And prepare for refusal, she said. He won't want panic. He doesn't get to choose comfort anymore, the Duke replied. The audience with the king was brief and tense. Foreign interference, the Duke argued, was the natural escalation of defeated internal power. The king listened grim but cautious. An accusation like this invites war, the king said. Without proof. We will have proof, the Duke replied. Soon, but waiting will cost lives. The king's gaze flicked to her. You stand with him? She didn't hesitate. Yes. The king exhaled slowly. Then act quietly. If you're wrong, we won't be, the Duke said. The first sign came 3 nights later. A fire broke out in the southern warehouses. Not large, but precise. Only one building burned. Inside were supplies contracted to a border garrison. No one claimed responsibility. No one was caught. The second sign came the following morning. A ship arrived unannounced at the eastern port. Its papers were flawless. Its cargo mundane. Its crew forgettable. Too perfect. The Duke studied the manifest, fingers steepled. They're testing us. Or distracting us, she said. They split their attention anyway, because they had to. That was when the message arrived. No seal. No courier. Just parchment left on her chair in the study. You cannot guard every door. Her pulse spiked. Duke, she said sharply. He was beside her in an instant, reading over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. They're close. Closer than either of them wanted to admit. The attempt came at dusk. Not steel. Not fire. Poison. The Duke collapsed mid-sentence, his words slurring as his hand went to his throat. She caught him as his knees buckled, shouting for help as guards rushed in. Water? No, don't, he gasped, struggling for breath. She held him, fear tearing through her with brutal clarity. This was not a battlefield. This was intimate, cowardly, effective. The physician arrived within moments, face pale as he examined the Duke. It's fast, he said. Refined. Can you stop it? She demanded. I can slow it, the physician replied. If I know what it is. The Duke's eyes found hers, struggling to focus. He squeezed her hand weakly. Listen, he whispered. If. No, she said fiercely. You don't get to give speeches. A servant burst in. My lady, we found this. A cup. Clean. Ordinary. The poison had been in the wine. She grabbed it, running to the shelves. Charcoal, she said. Now. The physician obeyed instantly. Minutes stretched like hours. The Duke convulsed once, then again, before his breathing steadied. Ragged, shallow, but present. It's working, the physician said. Barely. It did not leave his side. Through the night, she held his hand, counting breaths, refusing exhaustion. Guards sealed the estate. Servants were confined. Every cup, every plate examined. By morning, the Duke lived. Weak, pale, furious. They were inside, he said hoarsely. Yes, she replied. And they wanted you alive just long enough to know. The investigation was merciless. A servant confessed under pressure, not loyalty, but debt. His family had been promised passage out of the kingdom. Safety. Foreign coin, the Duke said quietly. Just as warned. The king reacted swiftly this time. Borders tightened. Ports monitored. Foreign envoys questioned, politely, publicly, relentlessly. But the message had landed. You can't guard every door, she repeated softly that night, standing at the Duke's bedside. He looked at her, eyes sharp even through weakness. No, he said, but I can choose which ones stay open. Recovery was slow. During it, something shifted between them. Not fear, but clarity. You almost died, she said one evening. Yes, he replied, and learned something. What? That I was still thinking like a man who could afford distance, he said. I can't anymore. She met his gaze. What does that mean? It means I stopped pretending this is only my fight, he said. And I stopped pretending you're only someone I protect. Her breath caught. He reached for her hand. Stand with me. Not behind me. Publicly. The risk was obvious. "So they see us as one," she said. "Yes," he replied, "and understand that leverage cuts both ways." The announcement came a week later. Not of marriage, not of titles, of alliance. She would serve as his official envoy, authorized, visible, untouchable by law. The city reacted with shock and approval. A woman without noble blood, elevated not by marriage, but by trust. The shadows watched and recalculated. On the night the decree was sealed, she stood again on the balcony, the Duke beside her, winter stars sharp above them. "They'll try again," she said. He nodded. "Yes, but differently," she added. He squeezed her hand. "So will we." Below, the capital endured, bruised, wary alive. And somewhere beyond the walls, forces were gathering, learning the hard way that this kingdom no longer bled quietly. The game was not over. It had simply changed shape. And this time, she was no longer a piece on the board. She was a player. The first crack appeared at dawn. It was not a sound, not an explosion, not even a scream. It was a message delivered through 3 different channels within the same hour, each confirming the same impossible truth. The southern garrison had fallen. She read the report twice, then a third time, refusing to accept the words. The Duke stood beside her, one hand braced against the desk, the other clenched tightly enough for his knuckles to pale. "No battle?" she asked quietly. The messenger shook his head. "No, my lady." Gates opened from inside. Commanders executed in their quarters. By the time resistance formed, it was over. The Duke dismissed him with a gesture. When the door closed, the silence felt heavy enough to crush. "They've crossed the line," she said. "They crossed at the moment they brought foreign hands into our blood," the Duke replied. Maps were unrolled. Pins moved. Routes traced again and again until patterns emerged. Ugly, deliberate patterns. "This is an invasion," she said slowly. "It's insertion. Small forces, precise targets." "Yes," the Duke agreed. "They're cutting tendons, not striking the heart." A knock came again, harder this time. The king's seal. The council chamber was full when they arrived. Too full. Nobles packed shoulder to shoulder. Voices overlapping, fear dressed as outrage. "This is your doing," one shouted as they entered. "You stirred shadows that should have remained buried." She stopped walking. "No," she said clearly. "This is what happens when rot is ignored until it learns to walk." The chamber fell quiet. The king raised a hand. "Enough. Speak." She stepped forward before the Duke could. "The South fell without a fight because loyalty was bought, not broken. We are not facing armies. We are facing contracts." Murmurs rippled. "A mercenary force embedded through trade routes," she continued. "Supplied by foreign coin, shielded by local corruption. They will not announce themselves. They will hollow us out. And your solution?" A lord sneered. "More secrecy? More power in fewer hands." "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "For now." The king studied her. "Explain." "We expose nothing publicly," she said. "We let them believe their insertion succeeded. Meanwhile, we isolate their supply lines and force them into visibility." The Duke added, "We bait them." Silence again, thick, wary. "Who?" the king asked. She met his gaze. "Me." The chamber erupted. "Absolutely not. You're not expendable. This is madness." She didn't flinch. "I am already visible, already marked, and already legally protected as envoy. If they want leverage, they'll reach for what they think they can take." The Duke turned sharply. "No." She faced him. "You said we stop pretending this is only your fight." His jaw tightened. The king raised his hand once more. "Enough. I will hear her plan." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. She would travel south under the guise of negotiating restored trade. Public announced, escorted just enough to appear careless. The routes would be genuine. The stops predictable. What would not be visible were the watchers embedded ahead. The false manifests, the sealed orders waiting to snap shut around anyone who moved too early. "They won't resist the temptation," she said later, preparing for departure. "They'll try to take me alive." The Duke watched her pack with rigid stillness. "I hate this." "I know. You could die." "Yes." He caught her wrist. "That's not acceptable." She softened just slightly. Neither is losing the kingdom piece by piece. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding on longer than either usually allowed. If this goes wrong, it won't, she said, though fear flickered in her chest. The road south felt different this time. Not frantic, not blind. Every mile carried intention. At the third stop, she noticed the first sign, a merchant who lingered too long, eyes too sharp for a simple trader. At the fifth, a courier who vanished the moment he realized he'd been seen. "They're circling," her captain murmured. "Let them," she replied. The attack came at night. Not loud, efficient. Her guards were disabled with sleep powder before steel ever left its sheath. She was dragged from her tent, hands bound, hood pulled tight over her head. Exactly as planned. They moved fast, switching horses twice, never speaking. Professionals. When the hood finally came off, she was inside a stone building, bare, cold, unmistakably foreign in its architecture. A man waited for her, seated calmly at a small table. "You're calm," he observed. "So are you," she replied. He smiled thinly. "You know who I am." "An agent," she said. "Not important enough to name." His smile faded. "You understand the situation, then?" "I do," she said. "You're late." His eyes sharpened. "Late? You were supposed to have one already," she continued. "But you underestimated how loud betrayal becomes when it thinks it's silent." He leaned forward. "You think this ends well for you?" She leaned back despite the ropes. "I think you've already lost." He laughed once, sharply. "You're alone." "No," she said. "I'm visible." The walls shook, not from explosion, but from movement. Heavy boots. Steel. Command shouted in 3 different accents. The man stood abruptly. "What did you do?" She smiled for the first time. "I arrived." The doors burst open. The Duke's banner filled the doorway, flanked by royal troops and border forces that should have been compromised. The man was seized before he could draw blade. The Duke entered last, eyes locked on her. "Unbind her," he ordered. As the ropes fell away, the weight she'd been carrying finally crashed through her. She stood on shaking legs. The Duke reached her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "You reckless." She cut him off by pulling him into a brief, fierce embrace. "You were right on time." He exhaled hard, forehead resting against hers for a heartbeat longer than propriety allowed. The aftermath was brutal. Names spilled. Contracts surfaced. Routes collapsed. Foreign investors withdrew under threat of exposure. By week's end, the insertion had been ripped out by the roots. The southern garrison was reclaimed without bloodshed. Back in the capital, the king addressed the realm. "There are no shadows left unexamined," he declared. "No loyalty untested." She stood beside the Duke as the words echoed through the hall. Later, alone at last, she sank into a chair, exhaustion finally claiming its due. "You could have warned me how close it would be," she said quietly. The Duke knelt in front of her. "If I had, you might have hesitated." She studied his face, lined with worry, sharpened by resolve. "You trusted me." "Yes," he said, "completely." The weight of that settled between them. Not heavy, but real. Outside, the capital breathed again. The insertion had failed. But far beyond the borders, those who had paid for it were taking notes. Watching, waiting. And the kingdom, for the first time, was no longer merely reacting. It was preparing. The end was approaching. Not with chaos, but with choice.